Economics in Nigeria and member of the Strategic Studies Group of the African Capacity Building Foundation, Zimbabwe. He doesn't stop there. He moves on to also becoming the visiting scholar, International Monetary Fund, IMF, and also he is the visiting fellow, World Bank. He holds several offices, but I cannot exhaust it. But ladies and gentlemen, he's not just joining us online. We also have online with us Ndidi Okonkwo Uneli, the co-founder Sahel Consulting, who is the co-founder AACE Foods and also the chair of Nourishing Africa. She is also the founder Leap Africa, and she also holds several offices, but due to time constraint, we would not be able to do that. But ladies and gentlemen, also to recognize one more of our speakers, Martin Fregene, the Director, Agriculture and Agro-Industry, African Development Bank, AFDB, Abidjan. He is also the plant geneticist and agricultural policy expert with over 25 years of research and development experience at 2 international agricultural research centers. He also is the former director of the Bio Cassava Plus project at the Danforth Center. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about people who know what it is to take the economy of agriculture in Africa. But ladies and gentlemen, to moderate this session, I won't be the one. I would want to introduce our moderator, the Senior Manager, Tax and Regulatory Services, Deloitte. In person, Tosin Adedoyin. Ladies and gentlemen, do join them online. Tosin, over to you.
This for the introductions, and a big welcome to everyone to the first panel session of the African Economic Congress. In this session, we're going to be looking at the topic transforming and safeguarding Africa's food systems post-COVID-19. You'll all agree that the COVID pandemic has brought about consequences, both direct and indirect, for countries globally. And while Africa may have escaped relatively unscathed in terms of number of fatalities, the effect of the pandemic on the economy and the food security of many African nations cannot be overemphasized. About 670 million people in Africa, roughly half of the population, already face food insecurity. It therefore becomes very necessary the effects of the pandemic. Agriculture is also one of Africa's most important economic sectors, making up to 23% of the continent's GDP. Also in sub-Saharan Africa, it provides work for nearly 60% of the economically active population. The current system is placed in place has faced immense pressure in the last few months, and this has caused significant disruptions to the consumers, governments, businesses, and farmers. However, this is not the time to rely on yesterday's strategies and methods of doing agriculture. Existing vulnerabilities in Africa's agriculture and food systems, combined with demand and supply shocks likely to flow from COVID-19, could be heightened unless mitigating factors, mitigating actions, steps are taken now. So to kick off the conversation, I'm going to be starting with Professor Jerome. Professor Jerome, the World Food Program Executive Director, David Beasley, stated in April 2020 that there are currently 821 food insecure people in the world, and an additional 130 million people may be added to this number due to the effect of COVID-19. The largest impact being in Africa. In your opinion, what are the broad reasons for food insecurity around the world, and particularly in Africa? Professor Jerome, over to you.
Thank you, moderator. Let's start from the very beginning so that we'll know how we move forward. Africa is basically agrarian, like you said in your remarks. We're beginning to see some form of social transformation because currently agriculture is responsible for 16% of the gross domestic product of sub-Saharan Africa. That is from World Development Indicators. But what happens there is that they do not merge the statistics of sub-Saharan Africa together with that of North Africa. And if you look at the breakdown, it ranges between 2% in Botswana, also 2% around South Africa, to about 59% in Sierra Leone, which is by far the highest in the world. Agriculture, as you already mentioned, produces about 65% of the continent's labor force, as well as 75% of the domestic trade. We hope we'll have time to reflect on this as we're moving towards trading in the Continental Free Trade Agreement, because these are the levers we need to build upon. Now, coming statistically to what you were saying about Bestly, I mean, the prediction about Africa, find that invariably, if you look at Africa agriculture and the food systems, they've been witnessing consecutive shocks in the past 3 or 4 years. In addition to climate change and conflict, which is making the level of food security so high in Africa. There are several dimensions. I mean, FAO, they have many of these statistics or something. But the joint report, which we did together with FAO for the African Union, we recorded 256 million Africans, or 20% of the population, suffering from chronic undernutrition in 2018. 239 million of them were in sub-Saharan Africa. And that was even before COVID hit. At the same time, about 12% of the population were categorized as obese or overweight because of imbalanced diets. We are seeing what is happening with COVID, that the first target are those who are not eating healthy diets. Invariably, I mean, looking at the statistics, you find that this is the first time for the past 25 years, the continent, Africa, is going to face a big recession in 25 years. That is what the statistics from our brother ADB is telling us. Because the economy is going to contract anything from between minus 2.1% to minus 5.1% in 2020. And specifically for the agri sector, we're going to have a growth rate of minus 7%. The situation is quite poor. And just quickly to give you statistics too, before we move to the discussion of what the COVID did or not did. At the African Union, we have a biannual review report where we monitor where progress countries are making towards the Maputo and Cadep declarations. The last report was issued in 2020. Unfortunately, only 4 countries are on track in that report towards meeting the Malabo declarations by 2025, which is not good enough. But the good thing is that looking at the statistics very well, as many as 36 countries, we are able to see some form of improvement relative to the first biannual review report. I guess I will stop here so fast before we bring in some other dimensions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. So what I gather from what you said is climate change, and also you also draw some statistics regarding where we are. So coming to you, Dr. Martin Fregene, Professor has already highlighted what the broad reasons are for the current food insecurity position in the world, right? I would also want you to also state what has been Africa's engagements regarding and commitments regarding ending food security and the nutrition deficits in Africa. And do you also consider these efforts, right? Are they sufficient so far? Do we also need to do more? I mean, what has Africa been doing regarding curbing food insecurity in Africa? What has African governments been doing regarding this? Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Tosi. And as a matter of fact, if you look at agricultural production all around the world and value addition, you can almost find a common playbook when it comes to transforming the agricultural sector. It has to do with productivity through the introduction of new technologies. There's new seeds and new methods of soil amendments, new methods of production. It has to do with policies that create incentives for the private sector to invest. It has to do with with R&D, research and development, to even develop even newer technologies. It has to do with organized markets. So the playbook is the same. And if you look at Africa, as a matter of fact, many countries in Africa are trying to apply those same, and then with some success. Let's be honest. 2% increase per year of agricultural productivity in Africa in the last 10 years or so is fairly high when you compare it with the rest of the world. The problem is that 2% increase per year of agricultural, production and value addition, falls short of the average population growth on the continent between 2 and 3%, and also falls short of the increased demand from the growth of per capita, and GDP, per capita income. Once income grows, people want to eat more meat, poultry. People want to eat more vegetables, and then so you have, even though Africa is growing, is the agricultural sector, but the demand and also population growth is making us fall short, and that has led to a $47 billion food imports that is poised to increase. So countries have been responding. I can tell you about countries like Sudan has really responded very strongly on wheat, working with the African Development Bank to raise productivity of wheat, by introducing heat-tolerant wheat varieties. I can tell you about also in Kenya, working with drought-tolerant maize, climate-adapted maize varieties, to increase production. They're all, every country is trying, but there are still some serious gaps, and I would like to address those gaps. I'll mention them, just 3 of them. The first one is the productivity gap. The second one is what I call the policy gap, and the third one is what I call the know-how gap. On the productivity gap, you see, for you to take new varieties and make sure that they reach all your farmers and increase their productivity, for you to be able to ensure that farmers have access to fertilizer that is required for new varieties to reach their capacity, you need to have a strong extension system that is able to deliver those varieties to the farmers and also teach them how to use properly. Many African countries, over the years, because of demand by international finance institutions to de-emphasize, public-oriented, support to agriculture, we have had extension system just go very weak. Secondly, we have also had a huge problem with seed companies not being able to receive these technologies and deliver it to farmers. Here, the continent needs help. On the policy gaps, it might interest you to know that 80% of all the food on the African continent is supplied by SMEs, small and medium enterprises. But these enterprises, they suffer from a lot of very high transaction costs, from very poor infrastructure, rural infrastructure, from poor warehouse, wholesale market infrastructure, where they can take their goods to and sell. They also suffer from trade policies that are not aligned to agricultural policies. So we do have a policy gap that countries need to address. And of course, the know-how gap. Agriculture is become very, very scientific. You need knowledge. What are the source of the crops to be able to, achieve productivity? And we don't have the kind of vocational training that is found in South America, or we don't have the kind of degree training that is actually oriented to practical agriculture you have in the US, like University of Florida. So we do need to also that policy know-how. You will say you will make faster progress. What the bank is trying to do, just to wrap up, what the bank is trying to do is actually to help countries to increase productivity through its Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation Program, or TAS. On the policy also, we're working very closely with platforms of SMEs to be able to articulate and then go to government and ask them to change those policies to what we call policy-based operations. And finally, on the know-how, we are trying to bring this virtual training on agriculture that is very well known in Latin America, very well known in Asia, into Africa, that our young people can acquire know-how to improve agriculture on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. You have mentioned some key point that I'm also very interested in, and that is regarding technology. You mentioned that there are three policy gaps, three gaps: policy gap, productivity gap, and know-how gap. But I just want to focus on the know-how, which has to do with technology. Technology has already made a marked impact on agricultural productivity, from artificial intelligence to use of smart machines, um, and yielding production of high yield crops using technology, and even up to crowdfunding. I mean, technology has been used in several ways to to foster agricultural development in Africa. But what we've seen is that this is yet to manifest all over Africa, because you still have some people that are still using the crude method. So, in your Dr. Martins, how do we ensure optimization of technology across Africa to transform Africa's food system? What do you think we can do to make sure that the know-how goes all over the countries in Africa?
Okay, so there is the component that is what I would call public sector, driven, and that's very important. And there's a component also private sector driven, and there's a component that is what I call civil society driven. On the components that is public sector driven, you know, for example, you mentioned ICT and the use of ICT to, to reduce transaction costs. Well, ICT requires infrastructure, telecom infrastructure, including in the rural areas, right? That is a very, very important point. And then also, respect to technologies, you also, need the public sector to step in with seed systems, laws that, for example, in DRC, there is no law that prevents somebody from selling, grain as seed. So those are all things that the public sector has to do to ensure that technology becomes widely available. You must have regulation, you must have infrastructure, and you must also have a very strong, oversight. But from the private sector point of view, the private sector requires finance and also requires access to training. Again, finance that is affordable, that is short, that is long term, and also low interest rates is very important for the private sector to acquire. That is why development banks like us are taking a lot of pain to ensure that we share risk with the commercial banks, what we call the risk sharing facilities, to enable commercial banks lend to the private sector. And then know-how, like I mentioned very briefly before, know-how is something that is the base of all progress. You must be able to get the private sector the know-how they need. And we have looked at many options. One option is what we call the platform approach. The platform is a group of private sector people that have a website or something where we can easily post, material that people can, just learn. If it's how to milk a cow or how to drive a tractor, that they can initially begin to acquire knowledge, and then later on they can always go and go and practice all that knowledge. Lastly, as I mentioned, apart from the public and the private, there's also civil society. You mentioned the crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is such an important, very, very important, part of financing agriculture now. But it's also philanthropy. Philanthropy is also very, very important to be able to acquire the knowledge, to be able to pay for those things. That is where, civil society comes in. Civil society needs to also be at the table, to ensure that all that is required, by the private sector, all that's required by the government to do, there's advocacy, there is financing, there is support to get those things done. Just we'll use one example: seeds. Seeds are so important, but many of these seeds, many companies don't go into them because farmers can reuse their old seeds, so they don't go into them. This is where government has to come in, and this is where civil society has to advocate for farmer organizations, like farmer organizations, to ensure that government provides the regulatory background, and also to ensure that government provides the quarantine, that this can enter the country without any problems, and then they can easily be used to to raise productivity. It can be the farmer to raise productivity. So those three groups, the public, the private, and the CSO, civil society organizations, are very key in achieving scaling up of technologies on the African continent.
Thanks so much, Doctor. That's very insightful. So let me come back to you, Professor. You are the special advisor to the AU, African Union, on and Commissioner for Rural Economy and Agriculture in the AU, right? So many global experts have predicted that this pandemic is going to be like between a 12 to 18 month battle. And we should expect future pandemics and future shocks that would then be linked to climate change and other crises. Professor, in your view, what practical steps can African governments consider to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on agriculture and also bolster Africa's food security? Over to you, Professor. Professor, I think your mic is on.
Sorry, yeah. Invariably, the African Union has been coordinating most of the efforts in terms of response to the pandemic. And just as I said, I mean, the earlier we live with the pandemic, the better for everybody, because I think it's going to be with us for a long time. What happened was that I briefed you earlier on that Africa, this sector has been one of shock, beginning with the fall armyworm in 2018, the desert locusts in 2019, currently the Horn of Africa, and it's been the worst in the past 70 years. Currently, now we have COVID. We've not even finished with COVID. We're having flash floods affecting several countries. So the sector has been very, very unlucky. So what we are trying to do is to make sure that we do not have a hunger pandemic as a result of the loss of lives and the livelihood because of COVID. So what the African Union did was that they met together with FAO. They had a meeting of African agricultural ministers. The first of this meeting was on 16th April 2020. And as many as all 55 African countries attended this meeting, 45 of them at ministerial level, including Nigeria. Specifically, they targeted 5 issues on how to mitigate COVID. My brother Martin will support me. We are both members of the task force. The first one is social protection. We know social protection is gradually catching up in Africa, but it's not there yet the way you want it. Especially the vulnerable. These are the people targeted by this pandemic. We need to find ways of making sure they have access to social protection. The second one was crop calendars and recommended actions during COVID-19 outbreak in African region. Because different African countries, they have different planting season and others. So to make sure, because at some point, because of the lockdowns, you couldn't import. Fregene told us that we import as much as 47 billion, which we can ill afford. We waste that money importing food. Even then was not possible during COVID. So we now strategically have to be looking for how to support countries to make sure that they're able to produce what they need. The third issue was they needed to support domestic markets during COVID-19 outbreak in Nigeria. I'm sure very many of the policies which you saw the Nigerian minister implement, whereby food was allowed to move all over the country. I mean, it's directly taken from this ministerial meeting. The fourth one was that we want to start taking the advantage of the newly created African Continental Free Trade Area. Hopefully, trading is going to start on 1st of January 2020. And it's an opportunity for us to reduce the food import bills, an amount which you can at least afford. The final issue, what they did was how to safeguard input supply chains, both for small-scale producers, farmers, fisheries, and livestock in the context of COVID-19 in Africa and beyond. But what the ministers did, they came out with a ministerial declaration targeting what they want to do. So what we've done after that is that a task force comprising of all the major players in Africa agricultural sector has been constituted. I mean, you have ADB as a member of the task force, AU, of course, as a member of the task force, the European Union is there, and they formed themselves into 4 main work streams. We are helping countries to implement very many of these COVID forces. In fact, a meeting is being planned for November, whereby the task force members, I think about 7 or 8 of them, they want to report back to ministers to say, this is what we have been able to do in terms of helping countries to mitigate the impact of COVID. I mean, when you say that this task force is who? I mean, World Bank, ADB, and what have you. The second thing, before I leave that point alone, was that looking at very many of these declarations, you find that it's not what only the agricultural sector alone can impact on, which was why this task force decided that there was a need for a tripartite meeting of the ministers of finance, the ministers of trade, and the ministers of agric. So this particular meeting held on 27th July 2020. This meeting also came out with some recommendations that sort of supported the earlier one, which agric ministers came out with. It was quite timely because part of the challenges we're having is that if you look at the Malabo Maputo declarations, I mean, looking at our annual review report, no country spent up to 10% of the annual budget on agriculture for this particular year. Yet we are having COVID. So it's been very, very challenging and tough. So part of the initiative we're looking for now is that we can get separate funding, because you actually need funding for this sector. Considering the fact that 12 million youths, they enter the job market every year. This is the only sector that will be able to give them sustainable jobs. So we need to prepare or have to build back better and stronger. So let me stop here for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor. You are right. You're spot on that. I mean, this agri sector is the largest employer of youths in the continent. So coming to you, Ndidi. So Professor has mentioned what African governments would do, and from what he has said, he has also mentioned that the private sector is also an active participant in bolstering Africa's food security. So I would like you to state from the private sector perspective, companies in the value chain, what are they supposed to do? What do they need to do to help us curb this food insecurity in Africa? Over to you, Ndidi.
The perspective that private sector actually has to be the driver of growth in the sector. That's actually one of the reasons we've gotten it wrong. We've taken agriculture as almost like a CSR intervention, a social good, instead of viewing it as an engine of growth driven by the private sector. The governments in Africa should not be playing in the sector. They should be settling the policies and creating an enabling environment and de-risking the sector. And in most of our countries, they've gotten involved as active players in the sector, distributing fertilizer, actually buying tractors, actually even setting up farms, which has been the wrong approach. So I believe the private sector should be driver. And in some countries where we've seen the private sector drive the sector, we've seen tremendous results. You see that in Morocco, for example, the private sector is in the driver's seat. In countries such as Egypt, we also see that. In many West African countries, we've actually gotten it wrong. Now, I'm involved in a number of initiatives, and I'd like to give some very specific examples. we've launched nourishingafrica.com. It's a portal envisaged as a home for 1 million agripreneurs that will create this $1 trillion industry for the sector. And building on what Dr. Fregene said, it's really about leapfrogging, leveraging innovation and technology. And through this portal and through this hub, we've actually attracted 600 agri-businesses that are driving the growth in the sector from farm to fork. Similarly, through my work with Sahel Consulting, what we're seeing is an appetite for private sector. And through one of our programs, which is called Advancing Local Dairy Development in Nigeria, we're actually doing that. Smaller dairy farmers to milk processors who historically were importing powdered milk from the Netherlands or from Denmark and from New Zealand, and now they're sourcing locally in Nigeria and producing for the local market. And that's what we appreciate, is when companies say, you know what, I can actually source locally. Africa is naturally endowed with agricultural excellence. There is no reason why we should be net importers of food. There's no reason why we should have food insecurity. So what are some 4 critical things we need? First, we need an enabling environment. Private sector cannot thrive where there's flip-flopping of policies, where there are restrictions on importation of capital equipment, agricultural equipment, where there are restrictions on even transportation. Private sector needs rural infrastructure, feeder roads, affordable energy. And this is where the government should spend its time creating that enabling environment. The second thing that private sector needs is talent for the sector. I've been preaching this for a long time. We need to rethink how we teach agriculture. Every single company I'm involved in is struggling with talent because we're still training people for agriculture as a science, not agriculture as a business. We need to revamp our vocational training institutions, piloting and prioritizing agriculture, food processing, food production throughout the industry so that we can have talents to drive the growth of this sector. Third, we need catalytic financing. And we've seen a few efforts at this, and I know the AFDB is doing a lot in the area of catalytic financing, but we need more affordable, more patient capital for private sector. We need de-risking of capital. And then finally, we need collaboration. I think in Africa, what we've been constrained by is still seeing ourselves as national players or
along
cross-border
the right thing.
taking advantage of our entire region as a basket, as a market. And if this is a $1 trillion industry, there is potential for every single player. I have seen profitable businesses in this sector that have thrived because of innovation. And we need to move from primary production to profit. We need to promote proudly,
Then
celebrate.
he came upon
And actually create a policy environment, back to policy, where we enforce local sourcing. In Brazil, they did something. They insisted on 30% local sourcing. I would say we should be bold enough to push for 50% local sourcing, not just for multinationals, but for restaurants, for hospitals, for school feeding programs, where we're creating incentives for local sourcing. I think there's so many opportunities around urban agriculture that we're not even touching. So for me, I think this is a wide space, and I'm so excited about the growth that we're seeing in this sector. But I think the biggest shift is a paradigm shift, that this is agribusiness and that money can be made in this sector. And private sector has to be the driver of growth, leveraging innovation and technology.
Thanks, Ingrid. And one very important fact that you mentioned, which I would also like Professor and maybe Dr. Martin to respond to, is the fact that you're saying that the private sector is the major driver of growth in agri, right? So you mentioned that the government should leave it to the private sector. What they should do is just create an enabling environment for the private sector. But I would like to hear from Professor whether this is the way to go, to leave it to the private sector to drive the growth in agriculture. Can we curb food insecurity by the government to also be involved in agriculture? Professor and Dr. Martins, can you respond to that?
Martins, I know your boss like using the term that agriculture is a business, and that is what everybody has has come to embrace the sector, how we want it to look at. Invariably, yes. Martin mentioned that majority of the farmers we have in Africa are small-scale family farmers who cultivate just maybe 2 acres or 4 acres of land at maximum. These are not the real people who will actually bring change to this particular sector. We want the big businesses to be part of this. I mean, take a country, for example. I mean, what is the average age of the farmers? I mean, many of them are close to 70 years, disappearing. I don't know. It's an endangered species, except to find a way to get the youth to become more interested. I mean, when I was in FAO before, part of my job was trying to get youth interested in pure agriculture. Many of them were not interested, but they are interested in value services around agriculture, which is where, as we move ahead, digitalization is very, very important, very, very crucial. It's changing the perception of agriculture, making it more profitable, and we need to be able, I mean, to assist the youth in reforming this particular sector, bringing more of them, like indeed he already mentioned. I mean, the big farmers, big agripreneurs. We actually need them to seize the developments in this particular field. Let me stop here for now.
Yeah. Tosin, I think I subscribe to what Ndidi said, that the private sector is the primary driver of agricultural transformation. You know, because let's look at the investments required for agricultural transformation on the continent. It's been estimated, the African Development Bank did a study. We estimated that it would take between 24 billion and $30 billion every year to get the value chains, being efficient, and then get all what is required to transform agriculture in Africa for us to become food secure. Of that, if you look at all what governments are putting across the continent, look at what the multilateral development banks are putting, it only comes to about 7 to 8 billion. The remainder between 17 to 23 billion has to come from the private sector, and they're already investing. Many of them are already, these SMEs, many of them don't even take loans. They use their own money to aggregate, their own money to add value, their own money for third-party logistics to transport from the farm, to the cities, their own money, to markets. They're already doing that. But government has a role to play, a very important role. And that role is to reduce the transaction costs for the private sector, build the rural roads, have strong regulatory. I mentioned seed. It's a very serious thing. If you sell farmers bad seed, that farmer would never know until they harvest. So the government has to have strong, strict laws that says if you sell grain as seed, you go to jail, and enforce those laws. Government also has to have what they call laboratories to ensure that certified seeds actually meet the qualifications of.
And in reality,
role.
Has so many advantages.
And I mentioned,
I know that a lot of people will
structure in the rural areas.
They have a tablet.
But perhaps more importantly, government has to fund research and development. You see, all what we see today in any country, even
of reading book, so many advantages.
2 billion transistors. Transistors were developed by the Bell Laboratories, way back in the 60s and 70s. Just that created all those, those things that eventually, today, we see the huge impacts. So it's government that has to that has to finance research and development. Let me just use the example of Brazil again. Brazil, transformed this sterile cerrados, that's the savannas, from a 0 agro-dollar, agro-dollars industry to a $154 billion industry. It was transformed by R&D. Embrapa then, that's the Brazilian National Agricultural Research Program. They produce tropical soybeans and also other crops, improve varieties, developed soil amendments that led to the transformation of that entire area. Just when they had gotten these technologies together, the new varieties and the soil amendments, the price now came in massively. And the government also built the rails and built the roads and built the access. So the two have to work together. And of course, the government also did land reforms, the personal land reforms. We all have to recognize that the private sector is the driver, but the government actually creates the environment to enable the private sector to thrive. Otherwise, nobody wants to invest this money if it's difficult to actually make a profit because of very high expenses, high cost.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Indidi, you want to respond to that? I mean, interesting
I just
stuff.
wanted to build on what Dr. Martin was saying. I'm currently the coordinator for the visioning exercise Vision 2050, Vision 26, and Vision 2030 for the Nigerian Agriculture, Food Security, and Rural Development Intervention that the government is leading. And a lot of these issues have been forefront of what we've discussed over the last 3 months. But one we haven't discussed today is security. Security is so pivotal to the transformation of the agriculture sector. We had focus groups with agripreneurs all over the country, and they kept on telling us government has to get involved in addressing security challenges because we cannot source from farmers. We can't even manage our farms. And this cuts across the board. So I'd like to add it to the list of critical prerequisites for enabling environment: security, security, security. In addition, and then another gap that we continue to face is around food processing and value addition. I think this whole challenge in our sector, where we have 40 to 60% of our fruits and vegetables going to waste, 20 to 30% of our grains going to waste because we don't process. And we don't have food year round because we don't process. And I think we have to invest in innovation and technology around local processing, even the fabrication of the equipment to process. And I'll end with Martin's point on research and development. This has been a personal mantra of mine. We have over 30 research institutions focused on agriculture in Nigeria alone, 30. Across West Africa, there are 60. And yet, they are not market driven. They're not demand driven. They're not addressing the pressing needs of the private sector. And where they do have great research, it's not commercialized. Sahel is currently working on basics with cassava stems and Yiswa with yam seed systems. And we're seeing the opportunities that can be unlocked if you commercialize great research. And one of my key messages is that we need to transform all our research institutions. We need to streamline them. We need to make them demand driven. And each of them should have a private sector advisory board so that every year they're determining their research agenda. They actually have private sector informing it, and they have clear metrics measuring their impact. This is critical to enable us to leapfrog and to enable us to build back better.
Well, thank you very much, Indidi. So we're running out of time, but let me just take this question. Indidi, this is still to you. Globally, Africa's top trading partners of agricultural products, including those in Europe, are also facing the financial strains from the lockdowns, which could curb demand for imports, turning them into less reliable trade partners for African countries. So, in your own view, how do we hedge against the threats to both imports and exports? I mean, because Africa is now going to be like a less reliable trade partner especially for European countries. How do you think we can hedge against this risk and also strengthen trade of commodities across the continent?
I actually think that COVID-19 has been a mixed blessing because these disruptions in trade have made us look inwards to say what can we do within our continent. And the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is going to start in January, is a great opportunity for us to find trading partners within the continent. But we have to add value. I do not want us to export cashew or sesame that's unprocessed. I mean, imagine that our cashew goes to India and then it's further processed in India, and then from India it goes to the United States. Why can't we add value? So I think for me, the challenge for us is how can we process more locally? That only increases our value and also increases our competitive advantage. The second thing is that we need to set clear standards within our countries and globally for what is good food, what is affordable food, what is nutritious food, and we need to ensure that we manage those standards to prioritize the needs of our people. It's for too long, Africa has been considered the sink of the world. There's so much dumping of substandard food on the continent. And yet, when we try to export, people say we're not meeting their standards. And I'm excited to hopefully see some changes in the WTO in a few days, right? Where we have an African at the helm pushing for equal standards and a level playing field for African produce, not only in Europe, but on the continent. And the third thing is that we need to raise the profile of African food. I've gone globally and I ask people, what's your favorite African dish? They don't know. They don't know anything about African food. African food is ranked the lowest in the world. Japanese food is ranked the highest. It didn't happen by chance. There was a concerted effort to raise the profile, to celebrate the food, to increase the knowledge of how nutritious our food is, and also to make sure we certify that food is actually originally from our continent. And I think we can work together across countries to uplift the profile of African food and to ensure that the rest of the world demands our processed food, celebrates our chefs, celebrates our great culture, and understands how rich and powerful our food really is.
Wow, interesting fact about African food and Japanese food. I never knew that. Okay, so we have a question from the audience, and I think this question will be to Dr. Martins. What is from Ms. Oko? What is Africa doing about early warning signal, disaster management, and mitigation? This will be for you. This is a question from Ms. Oko from the audience.
Yeah, thank you, Tosin. That's an excellent question. Early warning and disaster management is not just for cyclones and also for hurricanes. It's also for invasive pests like locusts. And one of the things that the FAO has done with the locust 19 invasion, one of the things the FAO has done is the development of surveillance. Surveillance, so you can immediately detect when the locusts are coming, and then for all of the weather-related early warning systems, many countries already have in place contracts with either some of the global satellites, imagery companies to be able to predict when a cyclone is coming and also move populations out. It is extremely important, but perhaps the most important early warning, more even than weather or more even than locusts, is farming. Early warning on farming when there's a shortfall in food production, just because of drought or because of other physical or biological events, and then the countries immediately are aware that there's going to be shortfall and start preparing for it. It's unacceptable for children and women and men to die because they just cannot get enough food. It's just unacceptable. I know the U.S. Food and Agriculture Department has started working with some African countries to put this in place, and they also have, even a farming warning system that actually looks at production of food in many countries, and then looks at demand, and then looks at shortfall. And also, I know that the G5 Sahel, that's the group of 5 Sahel countries, are also putting in place something like that. But we need to, as an entire continent, to have an early farming warning system so that people can, know that there are going to be problems in marginal areas and provide food for those people. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Doctor. So our time is fast spent, so we need to just wrap up. But before we go, thanks panelists, and I'd like you to just briefly, in like 2 minutes, just state your hopes and projections for Africa's food ecosystem post COVID-19 pandemic, just in 2 minutes, starting from Professor Jerome.
Thank you. Sorry, I got caught out. Nice to be back finally after a lot of connections. I do think the rebuilding of economies after COVID-19 crisis offers a unique opportunity to transform our agriculture and food systems in general by making it more resilient to future shocks, like what we were hearing from our brother African just now, providing healthy diets to feed the African population, which is going to double to 2.4 billion by 2050. The last party shot from me is that the United Nations Secretary General is organizing a food systems summit this year. It's being anchored by Madam Dr. Kalebata of AGRA. She's the one organizing this conference. And it's an opportunity for us to buy into this food system summit. What sort of food systems do we need that will not break down again when you have another COVID? Thank you.
All right. Dr. Martins?
Let me give the floor to Ndidi. I don't feel like maybe the lady should come last. So
all right. Ndidi.
You're muted. You're muted.
You're muted, Ndidi.
Okay, I would say that this is a wake-up call for us. It's further reinforced the fragility of our food ecosystem and demonstrated how weak our food ecosystem is and how urgent it is for us to build back better. And critically, what are some 3 things we need to do? The first is that we need to stop thinking about food just as an agriculture issue. The food ecosystem affects the health sector, science and tech, finance, trade and investment, gender, climate change, and it's widespread. So it's critical that we start thinking about it as an ecosystem solution and bring unusual partners together to address this. The second is that we have to put private sector at the center. Private sector has to drive innovation and growth. And finally, we have to prioritize young people, engaging young people into the sector, empowering them, getting them excited about the possibilities in the sector, and unlocking the opportunities. And I'll say not just young people, I would put a plug for young women. We have to close the gender gap when it comes to agriculture and the food system. And young women, I think for us, are critical to addressing this. Africa needs to close the gender gap in agriculture, in the food ecosystem. It will unlock tremendous potential, but it will also empower us, not just for today, but for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ndidi.
Doctor, interesting. So just to build upon what Ndidi and Jerome said, how do we build back, in stronger, more resilient? I think first of all, we should think of this as a business. It's estimated that by 2030, the agribusiness sector in Africa will be $1 trillion. So the question is, how do we make sure that other people don't eat our lunch? How do we make sure that the Chinese and Vietnamese don't take away that business? We have to increase productivity. We have to get the seeds of the best possible variety to the hands of our farmers. We have to also improve marketing. Like Nidhi said, we have to build competitive value chains. Look at the whole ecosystem. So from production all the way to the consumers, we all have to come together. That's the private, public, SOs. How do we build this strong value chain so that it's all about the market, so that somebody doesn't take away our $1 trillion market and then leave us unemployed. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. You can agree that this has been very insightful, and thanks to everyone for joining. Hearing from the panelists, it's clear that agriculture will continue to be at the forefront of every African government, and we've found out what we need to do, both from the private sector and from the aspect of the government, to curb food insecurity and to survive post-COVID-19. On behalf of everyone, I would like to thank the panelists and distinguished panelists for joining this session. And We hope that would you answer us when you call us, when we call on to you in future. It has been an absolute pleasure moderating this session, and I would now hand over back to Moses, the MC, to continue. I wish everyone fruitful deliberations. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Over to you, Moses.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you very much, Tosin Adedoyin, Senior Manager, Tax and Regulatory Services, Deloitte. Also, I would want to say very big thank you to our speakers, Professor Jerome Ndidi Okonkwo Nwuneli and Martin Fregene. Thank you so much for lending your knowledge to the African populace and beyond. A take home. We need to start treating agriculture as business. And when I mean business, we need to be more innovative and we need to secure that business, which is agriculture. And with that, we would forge ahead to the next future, because agriculture is one of the largest employers of labor in Nigeria. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. Just in case you're joining us, it's still day one of the African Economic Congress, AEC 2020. Real quick, we had the early morning session, that's a morning session, and this is the evening session. We just wrapped up the agriculture session where we had lots and lots of innovative thoughts towards fostering agriculture in Africa. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Moses, and with me also is Ogbonnaya. But before we proceed further to the next session for the day, like I earlier on mentioned, the AEC 2020 is a 3-day event. Today, tomorrow, and next tomorrow. We'll have the morning session and the evening session. But for the evening session, you can join us on all our platforms. Twitter at AEC Congress 2020, Instagram at AEC Congress, and Facebook with YouTube African Economic Congress. Streaming live on YouTube, you can join us on Money Line with Nancy TV, and also at official AIT Live and at AIT_online. The hashtags again, AEC 2020, hashtag AEC 2020 virtual. But before we move to the next session, a quick thank you to our partners and sponsors. In no particular order, I want to start off by thanking the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Bank of Industry Nigeria, Stairs Business, Car Sprints, Government of Imo State, Nigeria, African Independent Television, Nigeria, the Center for the Study of Economies of Africa, CC, African Leadership Magazine, Deloitte, Moneyline with Nancy, Jock Media Limited, United Capital, Development Bank of Nigeria, and African Polling Institute. Now moving to the next session, which is the last session for the day. Do not forget, it's a 3-day event, today, tomorrow, and next tomorrow. The next session is the education session. To join us, our speakers, I would want to introduce our speakers who will be joining us online. The first is Professor Jonathan Moyo, the former Minister of Higher Education Zimbabwe, who is considered as the core architect of the Access to Information and Protection of Private Act, and also Public Order and Security Act, which are restrictive legislations in Zimbabwe. Also to join us, we have Professor Samuel Edome Kumar, Vice Chancellor, Niger Delta University, Nigeria, who is also the former chairman, National Universities Commission Accreditation Team, and also the former board member, Center for Education Services, Basic and Pre-Degree Programs, Directorate of Consultancy, Entrepreneurship, Research and Development. We also have Are Afe Babalola, CON, OFR, SAN, the founder, Afe Babalola University, former Pro-Chancellor of the University of Lagos. He is also the former chairman of all Pro-Chancellors of Nigeria. And also we have Zawadi Sakapala Okondwa, who is also the director of M&R Construction Group Incorporated and founder of Sakapala Community Center located in Ntoni, Kijichi, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And to moderate this session, I would want to hand over to the economist, to an economist and financial journalist, Stairs Business, whose name is Gbemisola Alonge. Over to you, Gbemisola.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone for joining us. My name is Gbemisola Alonge, and we would start this session right away. We already know that the COVID-19 pandemic has had major impacts on the educational system and every other sector in the country. So, for instance, we know that over 99% of the people, of students were out of school as a result of the pandemic. So to start this session, I would like to speak to Are Afe Babalola to just let us know what the impact of this pandemic has been on schools and on education as a whole in Nigeria.
Good afternoon, everybody, particularly the organizers of this African Congress on Africa educational crisis, the face of pandemic. I'm particularly grateful to you, the organizers, on this laudable program on Africa's educational crisis in the face of pandemic. Education is power. If 50% of Africans had acquired quality education, we would not have been deceived by most of the economic, political, and social problems facing this country today. Indeed, education is power. It is only quality and functional education that can bestow power on anybody. Quality education is important, and poor education, on the other hand, is synonymous with ignorance. And as we all know, ignorance is a deadly disease. This is the reason why, after my successful 7 years tenure in the University of Lagos as a pro-chancellor, I decided to establish a non-profit university, private university, which would be an example of how a university should be run. When I learned that coronavirus had started in Wuhan, China, early in the year, I suspected that it would spread throughout the world like smallpox in 1492, yellow fever in 1793, cholera in 1817, measles in 1875, malaria in 1880, polio in 1916, and influenza in 1953. And what did I learn from all that? I learned from history of pandemics. And the best way to deal with it was to prevent any carrier from entering a university. We went ahead and manufactured sanitizers, distributed them among all our students, provided soap and water to students, and most importantly, it prevented visitors from entering a university. Harvard, as we all know, is reputed for academic calendar, which is predictable, and which runs from early September to early June annually. We have never defaulted since year 2010 when we started this institution. We quickly rearranged our programs to enable us complete 2019-2020 session in early June. Unfortunately, on the 23rd of March 2020, when the government ordered all schools to close down, we had only 7 weeks to complete the session in early June. Of course, we had not only but to beg government to close down the schools. At that time, it was a very, very painful development. Students were unhappy. Parents were unhappy. The schools were closed down. This is more so in that students were widening up their syllabus for preparing for final examination. That was the first impact. Next one was that we were impacted with financial and economic hardship. You know, we pay salaries and maintain the institution. Matter of fact, we pay almost 100 million every month. there was no way we could carry out this without the school resuming again. What we knew was that many institutions, public and private, were unable to meet their monthly outcome. In our university, we continued to pay all our staff. But in the 5th month, it became very difficult. And so we called a meeting of our staff. We tried to lay off some non-essential members of staff. Another serious impact was on teaching and including all relevant parts of academics. This was a serious one. We were unhappy that students had to leave at that stage. And we met. We tried everything possible to ensure that students did not waste away. Mock examination was conducted for a week between July 21 and 29. After we had carried out revision for about 3 weeks. The second semester examination was conducted between August 10 and August 28. Post-UTM screening was done online. The next impact was effect on education itself. My first worry was how to preserve the quality and functional education, which about is known. We use the best technology for remote supervision of our examination. We also put in the student and staff feedback mechanism to preserve and evaluate the quality of teaching, learning, and examination. These were what we had to do as a result of the serious impacts of COVID-19 on education.
All right, sir. Thank you very much for that, sir. So you mentioned that one of the impacts that the school or the educational system in general faced was the fact that students had to go home. The federal government had announced lockdowns that mandated people to go home. So I'd like to find out from Professor, I think he has dropped off, Professor Kumo. Okay. While we wait for him to rejoin, Mrs. Zawadi, please, can you let us know what your experience has been sort of creating room for, okay, he's back. So before, okay, so Professor Kumo, please tell us how what the impact of the pandemic was on your university. Prior to the pandemic, some universities in Nigeria, for instance, were already on strike. So students in such universities had already been set back by some months. So what additional impact did the COVID pandemic and being away from school have? Araya Fababala already mentioned that some schools were able to go on with examinations and even graduations as usual. Was this the case for your university, and what impact did you face?
Thank you very much, Bemisola. Let me respectfully thank the organizers and very reverse shift making way for us, the education sector in this country. For us in Niger Delta University, we were even thinking that we'll be able to conclude the examination before even the heat of this pandemic. But we received, just like received a circular from our regulators, the National University Commission, ordering us to close down our institutions, and which we obeyed. And actually, that affected us. Moment we've not been able to conclude the fourth semester, but we were supposed to round off academic session for 2019-2020 in August this year. But because of this pandemic, it is now really affecting us. Of course, though we are public institutions, that we are being financed by our respective proprietors like government and all that. But for some of us, it's like private sector driven. The model we are using, because our government will want us for money. And so decided to place subvention, a kind of grant to the institution. And then you, as the vice chancellor and the management of the institution, will now source for the rest. That's what we have been doing right from 1st of January 2018 till date. So the government will just provide some amount of money, which may not even be up to the amount for the payment of staff salary. And then you talk about the running costs of the institution. Of course, running a university is very, very costly, very, very costly. And the universities are not organized for profit making. They are not. And so it becomes very difficult for you to now, for public institutions, you now start to model them into a kind of business-like organization. So, and that's what we are doing now, because we have, it is clear, it is very difficult for us now, from the public, now remodeling the institution into a private sector-like organization. But by the grace of God, we've been able to stabilize the system. And this pandemic has really affected us, because now, even if you close the school, you will not totally close the entire university. The system will still be working. You talk about the administration. You must allow some of this lab equipment to even be on. Power will be ready for example, when there is no national grid in our university, we have 20-hour power supply, burning diesel. 20 hours, you know, there is no month that passes that we don't spend about 35 million on diesel. That's to tell you the cost. That's only diesel alone. And during the night, you need to secure the environment, so the power will be on for security reasons and the rest. So this pandemic has really affected Niger Delta University. For the students, they have totally, they are losing a session now. Because when we come back, even though we have this ASU strike, by the time we would have thought, you are talking about starting afresh before you go into the second semester. You've gone into the mid of next year again, if we assume that ASU will suspend their strike. Even now, we are talking about mid of next year and concluding 2019.
I think we lost him there.
Are you with me?
Yes, so we lost you for a few minutes there. But I would like to ask Mrs. Zawadi a question now. You had I know that you deal with students that are out of school and just children in general through your community centers. And according to the United Nations, Sub-Saharan Africa alone has 47% of the 258 million children that are out of school. So what did you have to do differently to reduce the impact of children being out of school during the COVID?
It's not clear. Sorry. Hello, I didn't get you clearly. Yeah. Hello?
Okay.
Congress for an invitation. It is wonderful to hear from fellow panelists, and thank you all for listening. First, I would like us to remember that this pandemic affected not only African continent, but globally. According to UNESCO, about 192 countries had closed schools and universities, and then 90% of the world learners were unable to attend schools. And this is about 1.6 billion children and young people. So what were the responses during pandemic? Just to give a little bit of background, as I mentioned before, our center is located in Mtoni Kijiji in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, East Africa, with the mission of promoting and providing social and educational activity to our community. Also, the center is surrounded or catered with the 5 primary schools and 1 high school. And during the pandemic, we followed Tanzanian government guideline. And if you remember that Tanzania did impose lockdown, meaning that rather we'll ask people to wear masks, make sure they have hand washed, they follow the guidelines. And however, the primary school were closed and secondary school in the mid-March to June of this year. So it's about 90 days students were out of schools. As a community center, we provided after-school programs to cater those students. So what we did that since the schools were closed, we decided to give a material to the students via their parents. And the mode first we thought about to give through WhatsApp group, and quickly realized that not every parents have access to smartphone. So we have to change the plan now to print those education material and to hand delivery to all our students that attended our community center. We also made available for phones to our teachers. So just in case if the parents have any question or don't understand how to operate with their students, so there'll be the teacher were available for the parents to access them. And as a community center, we paid our teacher the same as the government of Tanzania. They had paid to all the teachers during the school closure. There were a couple of measures that students, specifically for primary and secondary schools in Tanzania, were learned during the pandemic. Some organizations like Direct, they offer their platform for education material content, so students can access for free. And other kind of like phone provider companies like Vodacom, they also offer free internet usage to students, and also partner with another organization for them to be able to deliver the education during the pandemic. And I'll stop from here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Zawadi. So she touched a bit on the use of technology to continue education while students were out of school. So I'd like to ask Professor Edeokumo for just like a minute or two. Was your school able to leverage technology during the pandemic, and how were you able to reach out to students who were unable to afford to come online or to log into the school learning platforms? Professor Adeokumo, did you hear me? Oh, I think we lost him again. Okay, so while we wait for him, I'd like to also ask Area Febabalola the same or a similar question. What role does technology play in improving education in Nigeria and Africa, and particularly
health systems are
skills
Not yet over.
Critical thinking and problem solving. What role does technology and these skills play in improving education and human capital development in Africa?
Well, the whole purpose of education is to develop human faculty in such a way that it would be useful to the community. Our university went out of its way to ensure that we improve the quality of and the functionality of education at university, and make sure that when they pass out of the university, they'll be able to contribute to human development. As former chancellor, I knew and I found as a father that we have failed massively to make our students in this country develop that aspect of life. You see, when students come out of university, they go to their parents. Mommy, daddy, I have certificate. I want employment. So you see them roaming about the streets because there's no employment in them. I assure you that we have succeeded in large measure in changing that attitude to life in that university. As I said, we believe in quality and functional education. Students are taught how to deepen their soft skills in the areas of time management, team building, critical thinking, problem solving, and communication skills. Our College of SMS has collaborative arrangement with the leading television in this part of the world, the Chinese television, to train our students on the rudiments of public speaking skill, speech writing skill, and communication skill. You must be as solid as I am about reading culture in Nigeria. If you go in a bus or a train in London, you see virtually everybody holding a book or newspaper, reading. Unfortunately, in public universities, this is not, that culture is virtually gone. So, in my university, we sit on evening classes from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. for students and teachers. It is compulsory for every student in our university to learn 2 foreign languages, French and Chinese. Actually, we have found that learning foreign language has made our products marketable. We have to position education for better human capital development. Every student in our university must also learn at least one skill out of 28 skills in the university at no extra cost. The 21st university is ready to use modern information technology, that is IT, infrastructure, for learning, teaching, research, and self-studying, as well as establishing electronic library. With pride, I must say that our university was the first to use electronic board and interactive teaching. And board has e-book and e-journal with up-to-date currency. Like it's expected, in modern universities, it's better to have a data center running on very strong broadband internet to support its learning management system. Staff and students must train periodically in order to improve their digital literacy skills.
Right, sir. Thank you very much for that.
No, I have a little more if there's time. Yes. Okay. Register of arbitration, which I'm the chairman of the president. By the time they come out of university, most of them are already members of the Institute of Arbitration, which again makes them more marketable. If you are studying nursing at my university, you register for BSc nursing. But when you are going home, you must go home with registered nurse, RN, registered midwife, RN, registered public health nursing, RP, HN. And those who register for accounting go home with not the BSc for we register for. They will also go home with certificate of Institute of Chartered Accounts, Nigeria ICANN, Federal Institute of Bankers, CIBN, National Institute of Marketing, NIMN, and ISMN. To register for BSc Peace and Conflict Studies, or BSc International Relations, or BSc Political Science, or BSc Intellectual Intelligence and Security Studies, we go home with as many certificates as possible, including certificates of Society for Peace Studies, SPSP, Society of Chartered Mediators and Convention, ICMC, Martin Luther Agwan International Leadership and Peace Center, and of course, community engagement and academic CE, and so on and so forth.
All right, thank you very much, sir.
Okay.
So I'd like to know from Professor Derek Kumar, I know that your university also attempts to leverage on technical skills. So Area Fababala has just run us through a couple of soft skills and extra certification that students of Afel Babalola University gain in order to give them leverage in the labor market. So what sort of skills does your university, especially technical skills, what sort of technical skills do you provide or offer your university students to give them an edge in the workspace or in life in general?
Thank you very much, Shola. You see, for us in Niger Delta University, we have positioned our university to providing products. When I'm talking about product, I'm talking about our students who are graduating from NDU in Niger Delta University. For the world, we are not producing just for Nigeria, for the world, and then the ability to make ends meet after graduation. And so what we have decided to do in Niger Delta University is that no student will graduate from Niger Delta University without having a skill, a particular trade, and that will be certified by the Entrepreneurship Center. And so whether you are reading medicine, you are reading theater arts, you are reading accounting, or any course in university, you graduate with a particular trade, a particular skill. That's incorporated. And we leverage on that because NUC said universities can own up 30% of courses, they raise 70%. And so we have to incorporate within that 30% that was given to us, this kind of skills we are talking about in every field. For example, somebody who read accounting, who was in education, a lady passing through the skill acquisition center, came up to say that she should now be addressed as an engineer. Somebody that good area, not having this technical knowledge in working on electricity. That's what we have decided to do. We are blending academics together with entrepreneurship. And in fact, no student university without having courses in entrepreneurship. Because you know, entrepreneurship is also different from skill acquisition. Your ability, that's why under factors of production, as you an economist, we will tell you that there are 4 factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. But the entrepreneur will always make use of in fact, inculcate culture in them so that they will be able to manage the scale. For in medical area, for now, I think we are one of the best institutions because we expose our students to simulating machines. So this issue of cadaver and all that, whatever, we've been able to, in fact, one of the first public institutions in this country, Nigeria, that has such technology now, trained by the manufacturers from US and all that. So for us, we are really set for the world. And not only that, even those in, for example, in management science, in social science, all that, because of this internship issue, we don't want our students to just get only the theoretical part of it and then go and face the labor market without having the required skill. So what we do, this internship program we are talking about is also incorporated into the system such that they will be exposed. For example, you are reading economics and you're talking about the financial world. In your year 3, what you do now is, in the long vac, you are posted to all these institutions, banks, CBN, and all that, to get the practical workings of the economy into the ministry, budgets, and the rest. So by the time they return, they have that skill. And when they are leaving the university, that skill is with them. So if you employ them, they don't need to be trained further. So within the university system, they acquire all these skills. That's what we do in Nigeria, irrespective of the course you are reading. This industry university relationship is key. For us, in the engineering, it's not compulsory. You must have in fact, to show that, yes, you are really an engineer. You produce something that is meaningful. For example, a young man just came up and produced a refrigerator without using a compressor. That's from Nigeria Delta University. And they are working on this air conditioner without using a compressor. So that's the kind of innovation. So we are pushing our students. That's one thing that recently, because of our terrain, we have all this muddy soil, the water log area with all this kind of water essence and all that. Our PhD student was able to come up with what we call air boats. This time around, you are no longer using the outboard engine. The propeller would not be down the water. So, but you use air to propel the boat. On the water, the boat will move. In the muddy soil, the boat will move. And on the sandy soil, the boat will also move. These are discoveries, and we want to ensure that for Nigeria Delta University, we will always be at the top, ensuring that technology-wise, we will expose our students to have that, so that we change the narrative. We change the narrative that universities are only for theory. It's not true. For Nigeria Delta University, it's not true. We have incorporated that.
Right,
for example, those in mass communication, they have the practical. We have the studio. We have a radio frequency given to us, FM. We have it 98.1, Glory Land, Wilberforce Island. So our students go in there. And what happened is that all these things I'm talking about, they are homegrown. We use our own students, employ our own students in running all these things we're talking about. The person who is manning the radio station is a product of Niger Delta University. And then all working there, they are products of Niger Delta University. And so at every point in time, we see that we provide quality education for our own students in Niger Delta University.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, the quality of universities is measured by the products of such universities, which is graduates.
Yes.
If they are able to work well in the labor force and just in life in general, then the university has done well. One other impact of COVID-19 on the world in general is that governments had less to spend on education and on different aspects of life. So, for instance, university, in Nigeria rather, we saw the Universal Basic Education Fund reduced by 60 billion naira because it's funded by the federation account, and when the government isn't making as much money as it expects, obviously the fund would reduce, or the proportion of money that goes to the fund would reduce. So how can we, I'm going to ask Mrs. Awadi this question now. What sorts of skills do you think that we need to focus on or prioritize at this time? Because the government would not, currently might not be able to afford education as we know it. So how can we ensure that if we're revamping education across the continent, how can we ensure that we're focusing on the most important skills, and what are these skills that can make us, if possible, even reduce the number of years that people spend in school, and they can still come out and be relevant in the world that we live in today?
Yes. And I was so impressed by previous panelists talking about Niger Delta and how their students they come out. So I think the most, I would say there are common skills which are important to learn, regardless of your geographical location. Skills like prepare students, especially because by the time they get
through,
they have to have that skills that are really needed for the future job, for job of today, and also for the job of the future. If we can prepare our students in the youth, that will be more helpful. Things like to ensure education curriculum or syllabus that are emphasized on STEM, and I meant to say STEM as science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. Those are, and particularly for girls, because those are critical thinking kind of subjects, creativity, and also will be able to function in any other industry when they grow. And for example, as a part of community center, we usually offer science camp twice a year in primary for the secondary school student and primary school students. And the reason being that by the time most of the kids, they don't experience science until they get to high school, given that a specific example for Tanzania. So if you expose them with science at a young age, it's easy for them to learn, and also kind of knowing science is like any other subject, kind of prepare them at that young age. And another thing is with this STEM training results on the next generation of innovator, like the one of from Niger Delta University, but also will help policymakers, also students will be our future policymaker and the future entrepreneurs. Another skills I think is to invest in digital and computer skills. According to the World Bank, they were given that in a low-income country, is only 10% of the children have internet access at home, and only 20% of schools are connected. And the gap is even wider in underserved communities, like in rural areas. So if we invest in a digital and computer skill, will give young people adequate tools to enter into large labor market, and also to design their homegrown and entrepreneur solution, like the ones they mentioned that you have refrigerator without a compressor. So those are kind of things, skills, if we embedded at a young age, and only will be possible if we expose them to the computer skills, and also as a government to invest on in the digital. And the digital skills really will help to overcome the digital divide, and especially exposed during the pandemic. Some students were unable to listen to their regular class. They required maybe by radio or TV because they don't have that. So investing on that and exposure, that will be more helpful. And two quickly thing I would say that if we can provide a quality technical and vocational training throughout the schools, like in our community center, we offer vocational training, like teaching how to sew, because not every student will be able to pass to go to university. So what you do to those who are unable to attend university. So if we can focus on providing those technical skills, they'll be able to better their life, to help their family, just to expose it. And then the last, to just instill the culture of lifelong learning. Learning doesn't start from when you're in university, when you're school. Just you can start from kindergarten. On our community center, we offer kindergarten school education. We have a library that the students can go there and read. And those our library is stacked with the textbooks that follow Tanzanian syllabus, meaning the students can want to read something that they will be able to use it, apply at your regular schools. Let's say they have to do exam. So those are kind of things that will give the youth a way to recognize the opportunity and also enhance their skill through by creating a culture of life learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Zawadi. We're already behind schedule, so I'll just take 1 minute, so just 1 minute each for us to close up this session. So Professor Jokum, I'll ask you first. Where do you see education in Africa in the next 5 years? In 1 minute, please.
Shola, let me tell you that for me to talk just on this for 1 minute is not going to be possible. But I will summarize by saying that we just have to embrace, like as our sister said, we just need to embrace digital. Let's embrace digital education. This analog lifestyle has to stop. Even if we talk about access to education, and if we decide to embrace digital education system, you'll be surprised that nearly all of us who are struggling to go to
Oh, I think we lost him there. Oh, this is sad. So just because we have run out of time, I would ask Mrs. Zawadi as well. What do you think, how far do you think we are to get into this level where we adopt STEM skills and adopt digital education? In 30 seconds, please.
Yes. The fact that African continent have 54 countries with a diverse economy, what works in one country might not necessarily work in another country, but I'll say that collaboration and partnership is a key. Collaboration between teachers, parents, community, government, and non-government organization, and make sure that each student gets the support that they need, no matter where they live. And this pandemic is an opportunity for African countries and policymakers to focus on fixing what was exposed during pandemic and learn the best practice from each other.
A difficult one.
Thank you.
She left us with this Swahili saying there. Thank you. So together we can achieve much more. Collaboration in every sphere of education. Professor Dokumo also said that we should adopt digital skills so that we can expand how many people can achieve or get the education that they require at all times. So we would end with Aria Fababalola. We would like you to tell us what your plans are to not only educate Nigerians, but educate the rest of Africans.
I've learned over the years that education, that example is better than precepts. Afibala University has set up an example of how quality education, functional education can be achieved in this part of the world. I assure you that in the last 1 year, more than 20 universities throughout the country have visited abroad to see how we have achieved what we have achieved already. And why the Nigerian University Commission described our university as a model, a benchmark, and reference point. Even today, I received a call from the secretary to AUC telling me that they are coming to visit university which they regard as a template for education in this country. I have no doubt that this example is working. I have no doubt that it has even gone beyond Nigeria. We have universities from Ghana, from down and the Republic coming to see what we are doing here. I think I'm changing the world. Only last month, we had what we call Black History Month celebration by University of London. We are referred to our university as the University of the Next Generation. I have no doubt that private universities established in this nice type of university established by people who do not believe in making profit, who believe in quality and functional education, will emerge in large number. And that all universities will decrease in number because I do not see how they can cope and meet the standard of private universities like us. I have no doubt that if a university like us, which is only 11 years old, has children from all the states in the federation, has children from outside the federation, has other universities from outside Nigeria, has not to mentor them, that this example will work and education will be better. I want to thank you for
very much
to my dream of quality and functional education. God bless you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to everyone that joined us today. So we have heard of the impact of COVID-19 on education. It has stalled things a bit and moved a lot of people who were already behind in terms of literacy and education even further backwards. But based on this panel, we can see that there is hope for the future. So we have to leverage, as our speakers have said, on science, technology, engineering, math, digital sciences, digital facilities to expand the opportunities of education for many students across Africa and creating an example that we want to see in the rest of Africa. We are going to do that and more, and I believe that education would improve. So over to you, Moses.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ola, and I want to say thank you very much to all our speakers and moderators for today. Like I said, it's a 3-day event. This is just day 1. Day 2 will come tomorrow, day 3 the day after. But before we leave, digitalization is key in making sure that education sees the frontier of the future Africa. But before we go, I would want to quickly remind you that you can join us tomorrow via your TV station, AIT. That is where we'll be having the morning session by 10 a.m. But real quick, we would not have had this without the involvement of our partners and sponsors, Central Bank of Nigeria, Bank of Industry Nigeria, Steers Business, Car Sprint, Government of Imo State Nigeria, Africa Independent Television, AIT, Center for the Study of Economies of Africa, CC, Africa in a Leadership Magazine, Deloitte, and also Moneyline with Nancy, not forgetting Jock Media Limited, Venture Spark, United Capital, Development Bank of Nigeria, and African Polling Institute. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we will be drawing the curtains for today. My name is Big Mo, and with me is Obunaya. We would be back tomorrow. Do not forget, post-COVID-19 is the new era for the African economy. Good night.